As we go forward, but welcome everyone to CSIS. I'm Jennifer Cook. I direct the Africa program here, and I'm thanks to Ben Hubner, who's been, I think, in touch with a lot of you, who's our program coordinator. And thank you to partners also for co-organizing this with us. We're really delighted for that. We're going to talk today about civil society's role in countering violent extremism. CSIS recently undertook a report on violent extremism in the Sahel, looking at what the drivers are, what the national and regional responses are. And what's particularly striking is how complex and interlinked so many of the groups operating across the Sahel are. And violent extremism is just one manifestation of a much deeper dysfunction that's happening in some of these countries that manifests itself in violent extremism, but also in ethnic militias, in neighborhood defense forces, in criminal trafficking groups and gangs and so forth. So really to understand and to address the problem of violent extremism, we need to look deeper at the governance, the political economy factors that drive it, issues of social cohesion and communities living alongside each other, but perhaps in antagonistic relationships, the voice of communities that are often marginalized geographically and politically and economically, and the need to build kind of a national dialogue and an inclusive polity. And these are all areas where civil society has a huge role to play. And there are some, for all the terrible things that have happened in northeast Nigeria, there are instances of individuals and community groups, for example, that are taking it upon themselves to find ways of reconciliation, reintegration, and so forth. What we want to do today is hear from a couple of representatives who are in town, and we were just delighted to host them here, take advantage of their presence here in Washington, D.C., to talk a little bit about what their organizations are doing in this field. We're going to start with Kemi Okunyodo, who is Executive Director of Partners West Africa in Nigeria. She has expertise in the security governance sector with a particular emphasis on police accountability and citizen security institutions, citizen security and institutional engagement. All, of course, critical elements of what will be an eventual longer-term solution. I won't go into her bio. It's a long one. She's got a lot of degrees down here. But she worked with the CLEAN Foundation, which is a foundation that I think many of you know, extremely well-respected analytic and advocacy institution. And then we will turn to Adjaratu Adara, who is Executive Director of Partners West Africa in Senegal, with a similar breadth of responsibility, looking at inclusive security promotion, civil society strengthening, security sector reform. And then finally, we'll turn to Chris O'Connor, who's Program Officer of the National Endowment of Democracy. Thank you, Chris. Program Officer for West Africa, and who will talk a little bit about their broader global work. Pardon my voice. And Yemi, we'll turn first to you. Keep it 10, 15 minutes, and then we will open up to discussion and comment.
Good afternoon. For most of us that have studied or have followed the trend in Nigeria, particularly looking at violent extremism, most attention is now focused towards the Northeast. However, the Northeast is not the only segment of the country that has manifested this issue. For example, if you look at the way that ineffective or blocked political participation can be seen as one of the drivers for violent extremism, if we take that as an issue or an indicator, if you look across the country, within the South-South, the agitation by the Niger Delta militants feeds into this group. And then within the Southeast, sometime during the course of this year, we had the indigenous people of the Biafra, the agitation for secession, so to say, and have an independent state. Then, of course, pre-99, we had the movement of the Odua People's Congress within the Southwest, and the agitation was also, you can see the trends, and you can see similarities in the activities of these different groups. However, the scenario in the Northeast presents a combination of insurgency, violent extremism with humanitarian crisis, and therefore throws up more issues. But at the root of that are issues of governance, issues relating to corruption, issues relating to lack of education, issues relating to welfare marginalization. When the whole thing started, I think there has been a way that the narrative has been twisted a bit from what it was at the initial stage. What these groups gained ground, and I'll refer to the Boko Haram group, based on ineffectiveness of state structures. So you had spaces where government was not providing the basic infrastructure needed by the people. And this group came in and were providing these services, and therefore were able to penetrate the community or penetrate the social fabric. So Boko Haram, for example, started as a non-violent group, started as a group of religious in outlook, providing microcredit scheme for its members, assisting members to get married with it costing members. Marriage in the Northeast is said to be comparable to marriage in the southeastern part of the country. It's very expensive, and they managed to get their members to get married without expending so much resources. They gave the microcredit scheme. So you found that young men became members of this group. not initially as a result of agitating against the state. However, the state made certain promises, politicians made certain promises to this group of young people, promising them certain things. So exploits, or should we say, benefits of democracy, so to say. And they were not able to fulfill the promise. And 2003, 2007, another election year, and the same man came back again making certain promises. They held him to account. He gave them access to political positions within the state. That was when I think the Ministry of Religion or something was created within Borno State, and one of them was appointed to head that ministry. It's good at times for us to look back a bit and understand how this concept started and how it has now metamorphosized into the dragon or the monster that we all see. When you look at that vis-a-vis the Niger Delta militants and the activities in the Niger Delta, there are similarities and there are a bit of differences. Because for the Niger Delta, we all felt it was environmental. It was agitation against exploitation of the environment, pollution of the environment, destruction of livelihood of this, of the community, of the society there. However, response also, when you ask for dialogue, the state is reluctant to come to the table for a peaceful resolution or a dialogue. And what we have found is that people have learned to use violence to negotiate relevance within the sector, within the country. So it's as much violence as you can unleash that would make the state recognize you and come to the table and dialogue with you. These lessons learned. These are not, if you look at it vis-a-vis where we're coming from, these are things that we ought to have moved away from. These are things that you would expect that a country or people would learn and would not be making the same mistake all over again. But we saw ourselves making the same mistake even this year with IPOD. And when they started, IPOD is the Biafra movement, yeah, which is the also self-determination, a move for self-determination and actualization of a group of people from the southeastern part of Nigeria who have felt marginalized, and maybe I should say not felt, who have actually been marginalized to a reasonable extent. Their economy in the southeast, the infrastructure is not there. But then when you ask, you also look at it and you say most of these agitations are centered at the federal level. What happens to the state level and the local government level? And what are the ways that we are trying to engage state governors, local governments in holding them accountable also for some of these issues? And the truth is that accountability processes at the state level is weak. Even interventions that are taking place are primarily focused at the central level. Emergence of non-state actors, because you find that a group of people that do not have access to state resources needs to find a way of existing. And if we look at security as one of such, protection of lives and property, we have a proliferation of state security apparatus, overlapping functions and mandates, and practically duplicating efforts, trying to do the same thing. From the top of my head, I would say we have the Nigeria Police Force, you have the military, you have National Security, Nigeria Security and Civil Defense Corps, you have Federal Road Safety Corps, you have the Peace Corps. I can go on and on. Last week, we found in-house in the office, we stumbled upon a bill, a vigilante group of Nigeria Services Bill. And what's that bill trying to do? The bill is drawing mandates of the police, protection of lives and property, drawing mandates of intelligence, SSS, drawing from the mandate of the military, drawing from the mandate of the Emergency Management Agency, NEMA, drawing from the mandate of National Orientation Agency, to do what? To set up another security apparatus that would maybe serve whose interest? Because what we know and we appreciate about non-state actors, particularly the vigilante groups that we call vigilante group, and not in a negative way, but more of community-based structures, is provisioning of security at the community level. So what is the new, why is there a new interest by certain politicians to make this community-based groups into a federal unit, giving them powers drawing from already existing agencies, and giving them and not putting them directly under a particular ministry, because that wasn't too clear within the bill that is presently before Parliament. It's gone through second reading, which means most likely it's coming up for public hearing as soon as, and hoping that public hearing will be public hearing, because before it got as far as second reading, most of us were not even aware that this bill was before the House. Also giving them roles during conflict and post-conflict situation. So you start asking yourself that, could it be that even the state is contributing to initiating and fueling violent extremism within the nation state? And why could this be? Could it be linked to corruption within the security agencies? Because the security budget is opaque. Nobody knows what goes into the security vote. They are not accountable for it. The process of procurement within the defense and security sector is still highly opaque. It is not, it doesn't follow through the due process apparatus that is being put into place. So is there an incentive, honestly, to ensure that there is normalcy or peace comes into the country and by extension within the region? That I leave hanging, because we need to start, I feel we need to start asking ourselves very clear, critical questions. Is there an incentive for this war to go away? And closely related to that is the corruption that is taking place within humanitarian aid. And the Northeast is also a perfect example. So we find so many people going into the Northeast giving different assistance. However, the coordination, coherence of all this assistance cannot be seen. Many people, there are allegations of selling, they say, the IDPs selling some of the food materials given to them. If that is true, then the question you ask, did anybody bother to carry out a needs assessment to really understand what they wanted, what they needed, and ensuring that it's made available within the quantity that is actually needed? These are questions we ask, and we are yet to get answers. For us within Partners West Africa, Nigeria, we are committed to engaging with the security agencies. So for example, in recent times, we've just written to the different apparatus I mentioned to you, requesting for a meeting with them. And we're looking at it from the point of view of accountability. What are the code of ethics of your officers and men that you're deploying into the Northeast? Do you have a kind of training program for them? If you're telling Nigerians, if I meet a military guy in Borno, what do I expect from him? If he falls short within this standard, how do I report him? You know, last week or 2 weeks back was the first time since the inauguration of the Human Rights Desk within the Defense Headquarters, that on a live call-in radio program, that we got the address of the location of the Human Rights Desk, that we got phone numbers for the Human Rights Desk, and we got email addresses, address for for us to be able to lodge complaints. And these are some of the reactions to some of the documentations and some of the media reportings that have taken place in recent times. So we say for us within Partners, we're telling them, okay, fine, you've done this. What we want to help you with is provide assistance to you to collect the complaints that has come in. You need to be able to tell us how many complaints have you received within a certain time frame, how many of the complaints were investigated, how many were substantiated, and what did you do about them, so that you build public confidence in the process. And it's the same thing with NSCDC. NSCDC is as opaque as, even the military is more transparent with the Nigeria Security Civil Defense Corps. And for the Nigerian Security Civil Defense Corps, if you ask who is responsible for discipline, do members of the public know who is responsible for discipline within the Nigerian Security and Civil Defense Corps? The answer you're most likely going to get is you don't know. If you ask, do they have a human rights desk or a complaints desk? The answer you're going to get is most likely you don't know. And these are people that are deploying regularly into the Northeast. You find that the police and the military are in the forefront, and they're the most visible. They're the ones people can easily recognize. The police, for example, have done, relatively good work in having phone numbers in the public space, emails in the public space, contact details of police chiefs in the public space. But what do they do with the complaints that they receive, and how are they processed, and how do they provide a feedback into the public space? That still remains a challenge, and that's one of the things we are hoping to help them to assist. We're also very keen on the engagement of women in this area. We have a private joke in my office, and we say what civil society groups failed to do over 10, 15 years about getting gender mainstreamed in the activities and the policies of security agencies. Boko Haram did it in like a year and a half, and I'll explain. With time, when they noticed that the attack and the attention were on the men, they evolved and brought in female, and women became active perpetrators and members of Boko Haram group. Being in the north and the Sharia law, male officers cannot search female. And do you have female officers being deployed? The answer was no. Was there a targeted attempt to get women to be recruited as operational officers instead of serving tea and waiting on the wives of the governors and the politicians? The answer was no. So they had to quickly rethink and started recruiting women and getting women into operational positions in the military, in the Air Force, in the police, and posting them into the theater of operation. And what happened also was that even the CJTF, I think, responded faster than the formal agencies, because CJTF immediately started recruiting female members so that the female members could do the stop and search for female citizens. And this worked relatively well. And we can see how that has also made the process a bit more dynamic, to the extent that I know the Nigerian police force has a gender policy, and beyond having the gender policy, operationalizing of the gender policy is a challenge, but we're hoping they will do something about it. The military now came up with a gender desk within the Human Rights Office. I mean, that's why I said what civil society groups couldn't achieve over decades of work, Boko Haram fast-tracked it within a couple of months and years of when they introduced women as active perpetrators in the fight that it triggered it off. But there is also the social concept of it that we are missing. The social concept in the sense that looking at Borno, and I use Borno as an example, that women are now heads of household. For those of us that are familiar with the northern culture, women are not really seen in the public space. Kanuri women, particularly, are also heavily protected. But you're now having them as heads of household. They need to fend for their families. They need to fend for their children. Most of them don't have basic skills. Most of them have not done this before, but they are thrown into this scenario. Some of them have been lured into becoming brides or wives to BH members because they can provide for their needs and responsibilities. Some of them are still pushing back, but we are not critically looking at that. And for us in-house, we say we've raised it with some of our partners, that this is something we need to look at because this is a concept for futures study. How is this going to play out a couple of years down the line in the state? How does it affect the political framework of that state? How does it affect women's participation in governance, women's participation in socioeconomic sphere within the state? And then finally, one of the things we would start, I think, from November, is that we're conducting a mapping documentation and profiling and the scope of activities of non-state actors across the country. Because different groups come in, development partners come in, and a lot of people say, we want to be involved in police reform. And one thing we tell them, police reform or policing reform, because the police is not the only actor. You need to identify who the actors are and at what level are they playing so that you know who to engage with and who not to engage with. A lot of times we engage with everybody because some of them are nicely dressed. That, like I said, they can come up as community-based groups. They can come up as microcredits group. But so you're empowering people that ideally we shouldn't have any business engaging. But if you do not identify them, if you cannot identify them, we would most likely engage with them. Finally, amnesty program, Safer Corridors initiative. Have we learned our lessons from the amnesty program in the Niger Delta? Have we done an assessment of the impact of the amnesty program in the Niger Delta? How are we translating that to the Safer Corridor initiative that is being rolled out for the Northeast? In some couple of months back, there was a discussion that took place in Maiduguri, and we're able to convince the officer, the general in charge of the Safer Corridor Initiative, a partner organization, Center for Democracy and Development, and some of my colleagues went to Maiduguri with them to have a discussion to present the Safer Corridor Initiative plan to members of the public, to citizens, NGOs that are based in this area. It was like a rumor. They didn't understand it. And one of the things that kept flying is that repentant Boko Haram members are kept in nice camps and they are fed well and the standard of living is better than the victims that were in the IDP camps. They are going hungry. They are not having access to water. They're not having access to necessary social facilities. How do you incentivize repentant Boko Haram members at the expense of the victims? And we're talking about reintegration. Of course, there's no way you'll be able to bring them together because it seems as if the victims are being victimized all over again. And feedback that I get is that some of the discussions and some of the issues that were raised by the NGOs that were at that meeting has been fed back into the conceptualization of the Safer Corridor Initiative, and we're hoping that we would see that it really sticks, and Reintegration, finally, there was a discussion we attended some time back, and the pushback from the community members was quite strong. It seems like they are really not ready for it. The wounds are still very open. The process of healing has not commenced. With partners, West Africa, Senegal, we developed a joint proposal looking at how do we use the traditional justice system to start the discussion. Because the traditional African system is hinged on forgiveness, is hinged on you are your brother's keeper. Although that has fast been eroded by virtue of what has happened in the Northeast, but is it possible that it's totally destroyed? When can we start that discussion so that the healing can commence and then reintegration and rehabilitation can start? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Actually, I was reluctant to pass the note because I'm fascinated by a lot of things that you've said. So I hope we'll get back to them in the questions and answers. Let's turn now to Dr. Aidara. Welcome, and we'd love to hear what you're doing in Senegal.
Thank you. I shall confine myself to West Africa, particularly in the Sahel sub-Saharan band, which cover 1.6 million kilometers and a population estimated of 300 million. And we are to start with the context, and after we'll talk about the role of civil society and what Partners West Africa, Senegal work in this country. Also, the conventional threat and experienced by West Africa country, particularly Sahel, Senegal, Mali, Guinea, all sub-Saharan countries. West Africa is now face a new challenge, a new threat, and the security orders suffered more and more wide array of threat and risk, and the stability and the development as well as the population security. And the rebellion, the complicated democratic transition, the emergence of jihadist group constitute a permanent threat in the West Africa. 20 years ago, 10 years ago, it was civil war, but now many of these conflicts are resolved, but many of these countries are still fragile. I'm talking about the crisis in Côte d'Ivoire, in Guinea-Bissau, in Chad, in Guinea, and the rebellion in the north of Niger, the rebellion in the north of Mali, the rebellion in the southern of Senegal, with in Casamance, yes, and the Azawad, the MNLA, and most of these rebels, yes, work now together, and they are still finding a final settlement. Excuse me, I'm French speaking. As regard to the northern of the Mali, the alliance between the Islamic jihadist movement affiliated to ACMI and the Tuareg independentists constitute a danger to the destabilization of whole of this sub-region. The crisis and the conflict are the main cause of the political division, the unequal resources sharing, but especially the social misery caused by public authorities. As consequence of Africa holds the record of the number of refugees, internal displaced persons in the world, more than 17 million. The transnational organized crime, learning on border porosity, disintegration of the public authorities, the existence of non-right areas and corruption, organized crime is about drug trafficking, detention of arms, circulation of small arms, like weapon, human trafficking, drug trafficking took this last year a vast proportion in West Africa with the emergency of the narco-traffic state, a value of 1.8 billion related to cocaine traffic in West Africa are all, are all very, very, very challenges for the West Africa. The presence of Al-Qaeda in the northern of the part of our region, particularly in Mali and in Mauritania, taking hostage of the ransom into the financing of terrorist activities, is why partners West Africa work in the French-speaking region like Mali, Senegal, Niger, because we are based in Senegal, but we share border with Mali and with Mauritania, and the ACME was in the northern of Mauritania and in Mali. Mali shares the border with 6 West African countries, Mauritania, Senegal, Guinea, Côte d'Ivoire, Burkina Faso, and Niger. And the fragility of the state of Mali and Libya, the porosity of the border in West African region has favored the existence of a large market of trafficking of all countries that share border with Mali. Just Senegal and Guinea are not being victims of terrorist attack, which does not mean that we are not threatening. I say we need to make the prevention of violent extremism in this country, because Guinea share 315 border with Mali, and the crisis of Mali is concerned at the highest level the Guinean authority, who fear an infiltration of an armed group in their country and in Senegal too, in our country, because Partners West Africa, Senegal is based in Senegal. And in addition, that this country, these borders that we share with Mali, we share border, Senegal share borders with Guinea and Guinea-Bissau and the Gambia. And with the rebellion that we have in the southern of Senegal, in Casamance, with Senegal share border with Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, and Guinea, but with the borders that we share with these 2 countries, Gambia and Guinea-Bissau, these populations have the same culture, they have the same language, they have the same language and the same culture, and between these borders, we have, in general, the same family. And if we have problem in Guinea-Bissau or in the Gambia, instead of many of the population say that the rebellion in Casamance is funded by the Gambia and the Guinea-Bissau authorities, it exists a proliferation of small arms in the southern of Senegal, and the light weapons, the drug trafficking, and a cross-border crime between Senegal and Guinea-Bissau, Senegal, Guinea, and Senegal, Mali. And if it is even to hear that in their head of the state who maintain the financing the Casamance rebel, the Francophone country of West Africa have, in general, just Mali and Niger as a source of insecurity. But can we just talk about about Nigeria? I will just talk about the countries that we share, that share border with Mali, Senegal and Guinea and the other. And because of the underdevelopment, the poverty, the young unemployment, the difficulty of education on having a training to have money for your own development. With the explosion of the demographic, we have youth are a social bomb in this country. With a very strong democratic growth, Africa holds a young population that is uncertainly an asset for the future, which for the moment pose to and solve the problem of support. The sub-Saharan Africa is one of the only regions in the world where poverty has increased in spite of the sustainable economic growth since the beginning of the years of the years 2000. The religion extremism and cultural rights, even if religious communities have long lived and still live in perfect harmony, frequent clashes occur. The proliferation of sects could also be a source of radicalization, therefore potential conflict with the religion of the book in West Africa. The ethnic extremism is also a concern at West Africa state level, where some ethnic groups continue to dominate others by occupying the highest function in the head of the state, particularly in the security sector. The common denominator of this application of Islam based on its ancestral practice, that's to say a literal reading of the Quran text without interpretation, which brings back to what is qualified as ultra-conservative. That leads to an ambition of creating a Muslim country is the Daesh phenomenon or Islamic State, which have pledged allegiances to one of the jihadist movements in the Sahel, like Al-Murabitun, derived from ACME. All these movements use the same operating mode. They engage us to another type of war, which the enemy holds the rate of the intensity.
Ajaratu, I wonder if, just in the interest of time, maybe you could jump to kind of what Partners is doing in that space.
Yes, I'm going because I'm going on that. Because the force of the terrorism is the recruitment and the radicalization of young people. And the civil society are strength and weakness in Africa because they are constituted by community and traditional leaders, religious leaders, young. They have association, they have organization of women, and they need to be better organized. And any society knows freak to human by nature confrontation. Dialogue must be the permanent and open. That is to say that it must accept others the way they are with their culture in order to establish a permanent dialogue of culture which allows to know more. For the gender aspect, if one considers the dimension of women, one realizes that in Africa in general, they are underrepresented in the security sector at the highest level and decision-making. It must be emphasizing, however, that women play an important role in their different organizations for peace and conflict prevention. They are among the best mediators for crisis and conflict management, but only 9% of the negotiators who participate in the peace talk between 1992 and 2011 were women. And I give just some example in the Mano River Union, in Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. The women action will be distinguished and sit as an example in Africa. As well, the more women in Casamance and in Mali sit as an example because they done a very good work for the signing of the peace agreement in their different countries. And the solution is to engage and to maintain a permanent dialogue with the population at the border to adhere their culture of tolerance, the culture of inclusion, the culture of peace, of democracy and good governance, and women can play a very important role in this research and the conduct of such dialogue. Put the emphasis on the need to encourage the participation of women in peace talk. Partners West Africa have much initiative, and I will just talk about 3 of our major projects that we done in Mali and in Senegal, in Côte d'Ivoire, and in Guinea. The first is a security sector reform project funded by the NID in Mali, and we support civil society and military relations in the north of Mali, in Tombouctou, in Gao, and in Bamako to contribute in the security sector reform. And after this first project, the recommendation was to train more the women civil society because they work well in this country. And we train civil society organization, women civil society organization in the security sector reform and the prevention of terrorism in Ségou, in Mopti, and in Bamako. We done training, we done sensibilization first in the concept of security, the concept of human security, what is the security sector reform, what they can do, what skills they need to effectively work with the government and the defensive force security to the security sector reform. And now when they have the skill, they can effectively work because we done first the project in Guinea, and it's a world work because now the civil, we train in Guinea 198 civil society organizations, and now they participate effectively in the security sector reform in Mali, in Guinea, and we do the same in Mali. This is the first project that we done in Mali, and we give them the skill that they need to participate. In Senegal, it's not the same because Senegal is relatively stable, and many of the donors say that there is no problem in Senegal. Their perception are that Senegal have not security problem. But it's not very true because I say that Senegal share border with Mali, with Mauritania, and with other countries that have civil war. It's why we have funded by the United States Institute of Peace, the USIP, to do a justice and dialogue and security. It's named GSD program that they done in 5 other countries in the Sahel and in Tunisia. And it's a dialogue that we make with the government, the civil society organization, young people, women, and the local authorities. And it's start since last year as a pilot project, and now Guédiawaye, that is a suburban city in Dakar, and it's an important suburban city in Dakar. We done this project, we start this dialogue project, and it's a prevention of a violent extremism because it's focused on young, on people who are, and all the actors are interested by this project. And so the project is a dialogue, and together they can identify a solution with an inclusive participation, a transparent and reform process between these groups, and it's the first project that we done for the prevention of violent extremism in Senegal. And we have another project that we just closed out in Senegal, in Côte d'Ivoire, and in Guinea. It's funded by the IDRC, the International Development Research Center, and it's a multi-center research study that aims to identify the best implementation policy for crime and insecurity prevention in West Africa, and to promote an inclusive security management. And Partners West Africa recommend a strategy, a means, and a governance tools that contribute to prevent crime and insecurity in West Africa. And it's the three projects that I just want to talk for this day. And I will conclude by talking that the inability of the state, of Africa's state, to effectively control their border, the weakness of the institution are relevant explanation to the rise of the terrorism group in West Africa. The territorial organization inherited from the colonization have made a particularly impossible the effective management of our border. And to fight effectively against the terrorism, which is the symbol of the violence is our day, and more particularly to prevent the recruitment and the radicalization, state must have a strong control in their community, especially on their young people, and they cannot be done it without the civil society organization, including the young people and the women. Thank you.
Well done. I know that's not easy to give a long presentation in a second language, so you did great. Thanks.
Yes, I say them. I'm French speaking. I will try to speak my best English.
You did very well. Chris.
Thank you. I think you both provided really tremendous overviews of the situations that you're working on in your countries. I do not want to take a lot of time really to delve into the details of conflict, of violent extremism in the specific countries themselves, but rather I'd like to pull back a little bit and explain a little bit of the framework by which or in which NED views our support to civil society groups trying to work on these incredibly complex issues throughout the region and honestly throughout the globe. So I would first and foremost say that over the past several years, I think we've seen a lot of compelling research that has come out and really indicated that there's never one primary factor. It's not just governance, just religion, just issues of poverty that are contributing to this breakdown in the state, to people ultimately choosing to take up arms against both their states and their communities, but rather people's motivations for participating in this violence are quite nuanced. It's really an individual path for many of those who are choosing to join these organizations perpetrating this violence, and I think it's quite important for civil society organizations, donors, governments alike to acknowledge that while they're trying to develop interventions that address these considerable concerns. That said, I think that you really do need to approach this at both a very localized level. Perhaps we can't really get to the individual level in terms of necessarily trying to address every grievance that everybody feels, but we do need to get down to the community level and try to, in the short term, address these drivers that are present in those communities. In the medium to long term, I think we really need to be investing more in also addressing the systemic challenges, such as corruption, such as security sector reform, that are creating an enabling environment that has really helped to at least set the stage. People might not be picking up a gun because their government's stealing money, but because their government's stealing money, because there is that security sector abuse, because there are issues of disparity within those communities, people ultimately are moving in that direction. And then beyond that, I think that there's really, it's quite imperative for donors, for civil society, for governments to better enable for conversations between those local communities and the national level to take place. I think that this is something that has been a challenge for NED, for other donors, is, okay, maybe we can identify local partners who are designing interesting projects in communities ravaged by violence that are persistently experiencing these insurgencies. And we can identify other organizations that are working at the national level to counter things like corruption and maybe even down at the state level. But how can we better facilitate communication between those local organizations and the national ones such that the local perspective is heard in the capitals and that the capitals organizations in those capitals, in those larger cities, are coming back to the communities and assisting them in coping with their challenges from their perspective. Kemi, I know that you were saying you have this issue of reintegration. Communities are quite hostile to that at present. How do you ensure that those voices are then heard in Abuja and beyond, in DC, in London, such that people aren't plowing money into the Nigerian government to set up a huge reintegration project at present without consulting those local partners? So I would say we have quite a few partners throughout the entire Sahel, working in Burkina, in Niger, in Mali, in Cameroon, in Nigeria, trying to work on these issues at the local level. We're really trying to ensure that their voices obviously are heard, that they have resources to engage in these initiatives, because to a large extent, the resources have not really been getting down to the local level. Obviously, there are individual projects where there have been successes, but much of your, say, federal assistance in Nigeria is not going to local groups that are identifying these local projects. And though I'm not as familiar with places like Mali, I suspect that that's also similarly a problem. I think once we find many of these local organizations that are coming to us with proposals, really designing their own interventions, one thing that we're very much on the lookout for would be a large focus on strengthening community linkages. We're seeing that there, ultimately in many of these communities, are breakdowns between the traditional structures in government, between youth and their elders, gender dynamics that are not the historical norm, and obviously some of those things will be fluid as you have different developments within government. But as Kemi were saying, you have these challenges in terms of marriage. If there aren't those economic opportunities, you are going to have issues on the marriage front. How are communities attempting to address these, what ultimately are lower level concerns, but that are contributing to that violence? I think within that strengthening community linkages, you also need to look at the concept of expanding political inclusion. In parts of Nigeria, traditionally many community members did not have as much of a say in how government was constructed, who their representatives were. You still don't to a large extent with issues such as local government elections. Maybe at the national level things are improving, but many people don't feel like they have a say at the table, and they still don't have a say even when the governments are coming in and saying, okay, we're reestablishing peace and security, we're going to develop the area. They don't actually think that those development initiatives are the ones that they're advocating for. Beyond that, I think a second or third key component would really be deepening tolerance. So not all these communities are necessarily that ethnically mixed, but you have people from different backgrounds, different religions, sometimes different ethnicities, and the like. And as violence has expanded in some of those places, traditional mechanisms to cope with conflict have fallen apart. People have become more segregated, perhaps self-segregated, but you might not have Christians or Muslims or different ethnic groups mixing in the IDP camps. And they've experienced this violence in very different ways. How are you attempting to address those concerns such that when people do go back to their communities, they know that they can trust their neighbor, they know that there are other people who feel like they have had a very difficult time as well. I think really you're looking at providing individuals and communities with the dignity of having a say in their future. Turning to the national level, again, as both of you have suggested, you have huge issues of broader systemic challenges where people don't have a say in government. Again, tolerance, inclusion do come up as well, but you have horrendous issues of corruption at all levels of government in places like Nigeria and in Mali, elsewhere, where federal resources or state resources are being looted wholesale, not only by politicians, but even by militaries, security forces that are deployed to these communities to restore security. So though things have obviously improved to an extent in Nigeria, you had a military that wasn't effectively combating Boko Haram for years, in part because many of those resources were being diverted by both politicians and the military. And that further, even if that wasn't an initial driver in this conflict, that's further exacerbating the problem and then lending credence to the arguments of the militants when they say, look, we're fighting this corrupt system, and even in their efforts to come in and intervene, they're still falling back into those same patterns. You also obviously have those security sector reform challenges with gross human rights violations, and while many communities may not necessarily feel compelled to or motivated to join extremist organizations, they're not necessarily going to lend a helping hand to the security forces because they don't trust them. And if the security forces are coming in and committing as much violence as the extremists, you have a community or individuals that maybe they're choosing to join the civilian JTF because they think that that would better protect their communities. Maybe they're choosing to join Boko Haram because they've lost family members to some of these challenges. And I think these motivations, especially at that macro level, are coming up again and again in things, in numerous research reports that we're seeing. I would like to turn a little bit and then look more at these linkages. So NED has, I would say, faced some challenges with our partners really trying to connect those local organizations to some of the more sophisticated, perhaps larger organizations in the capitals, and to have their voices heard in terms of engagement with government. I think that this is something that we probably will continue to struggle with in terms of distance, communication, capacity, and the like, but increasingly I think we're trying to encourage our partners to have conferences where you're bringing people from the outlying areas for them to contribute to conversations on not only local problems, not only extremism, but really national level reform. What do they want to see in these challenges? Or what do they want to see as you address constitutional reform, as you address electoral reform? In the near future, we'll probably be doing something like that in Mali with many of our partners, both those directly working on extremism and those working on governance issues. In Nigeria, more broadly speaking, on our governance front, we've been trying to do that as well. To quickly turn to a few of the partners that we are working with, I don't want to go too long so that we can have some time for questions, but obviously Kemi's familiar with some of them. We're currently working with Clean Foundation. They're working really to try, at the national level, to try to promote some dialogue between civil society and the military. I think there have been more initiatives to improve engagement with the police, but the military has been a little bit more closed and suspicious of civil society. So how do you create a platform where maybe local organizations, local partners might not necessarily feel comfortable directly going to the military, but how do you create a platform whereby they can at least access others in a safer space, such as perhaps Abuja, to engage on some of these security sector reforms? On issues of corruption, we've been working with the Socioeconomic Rights Advocacy Project that's monitoring how the Economic Financial Crimes Commission is dealing with corruption, in particular with the military and beyond. We've been working with journalists throughout the region who are trying to better identify or better compel government to be accountable through revelations of government corruption. Turning a little bit back towards the local level, in Niger, we have a relatively young organization that's working in the Difa region, and they've consulted with local communities. They're a member of the community themselves, and they've been trying to use arts and culture projects to discuss how you can restore tolerance in those communities and how you can strengthen those linkages again between the youth and the traditional leaders. In northern Nigeria, we've been funding the Solidarity Center, which is an American-based organization, but they've heavily been working with the different labor unions in Nigeria, particularly the health sector and education sector unions that have definitely felt the brunt of conflict in places like Borno, to see how can they use the union institutions to better explore how people have experienced the conflict and better design development projects and beyond for both the emergency response mechanisms at the state level, but also to convey those to the federal level through the NLC, TUC, and then further on to the National Assembly and beyond. Sure.
We probably should turn and take some questions. And so thank you, yeah. Where can we find more? Probably on the NED website. But I mean, the three big common themes that I see in all of this is corruption, which is the major facilitator of transnational crime, of extremism, violence, and so forth. Many of the arms circulating have been sold out of government caches, for example. The need for civil military trust and engaging civilians in the military in forums where they can kind of debate, discuss, and learn of each other's concerns. The civilian communities will be ultimately the best intelligence providers to the military, but you need that trust. And then finally, kind of expanding the access of communities and to the local and the national government. How do you broaden that interface for discussion? Why don't we turn for a few questions? We don't have a whole lot of time, but we'll take a few at a time. I don't have my glasses, so if you're someone I know and I don't recognize you, forgive me. Yeah.
Okay, my name is Stanley Ibe. I'm a fellow at the National Endowment for Democracy, but I'm also a Nigerian. So, you know, it appears that a lot is going on in all the countries. But I wonder if the panelists could reflect on how all of these initiatives connect. Because in the context in which I work in the criminal justice space, that's a huge problem, both on the government side, but also on the civil society side. So since this event is about the role of civil society, can you reflect a bit on that? The other question will go to Kemi. So the engagement with the traditional institutions sounds interesting, but Professor Gambari's Savannah Center attempted something like that in the past. So it would be interesting to know how what you're planning differs from that, and who the interlocutors would be for this engagement, because that's so important. It's very difficult to find interlocutors at this point. The final point will be, the final question will be to both of you from Partners West Africa. It would be interesting to know how all of these interventions connect in terms of what your overall objective would be for the interventions. In short form, how would you describe success for the interventions that you're making at the moment?
Okay, well, that's 3 questions, so sorry. No, I'm just kidding, Stanley. Let's take a few more. Yes.
Thank you. Hi, thank you so much. My name is Anna Applebaum, and I work for the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security. And I appreciate at least 2 of you, most of you up there, talking about women's roles, especially women as violent actors, and how that's influencing sort of the context and how we're approaching extremism. And I was hoping you could speak to how civil society specifically is working on preventing the recruitment and radicalization of young women. If you could just speak a little bit as to what civil society is doing, and then any government initiatives that are doing that as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And the gentleman over there.
My name is Nasser Ngawa. I'm also Nigerian, and I'm a student at SAIS at Johns Hopkins University. I don't know whether it's a question or perhaps maybe it's a comment. I know there's the whole idea and concept, I guess, of civil society organizations is to sort of extend a helping hand to public institutions and fill in the safety net gaps and so on and so forth. So there's a whole lot more that you could be doing. And I think one of those things, not to say you're doing it or you're not doing it, but you could be doing in Nigeria, is in terms of communication. Communication in the sense that there are so many civil society organizations. You had mentioned how the Ministry of Defense just set up a help desk. Do civil society organizations doing sort of that kind of work have their own help desks, sort of a one-stop shop where you could do things as little as gathering data on demographics in these areas, you know, that sort of work. So if you could just talk a little bit about that. Thank you.
Thanks. Let's turn back for some answers, and if we don't take too long, we can come back for another set. Do you want to start with Chris about the connections among the groups, the communication question?
Sure. In terms of the coordination of CSOs, I think that's something that's always a challenge for our partners throughout the region. I think that NED itself does try to coordinate with other foundations, other donors, and link our partners up so that at least the donors are aware of what they're working on. But with the civil society organizations, we are trying to do more regional conferences where we're bringing them together, both within specific countries and then throughout certain regions, and at times provide for funding that allows multiple organizations to jointly work on projects. To quickly turn, I guess, to the third question, in terms of a CSO, sort of civil society help desks, I think many of our partners do have strong communication strategies where they do engage either through live or online radio programs on the various issues that they're working on. Some, I think, have tried to serve as more or less human rights desks and beyond when security sector agencies have not provided them themselves.
Great. Charatu, did you get the questions?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. For Partners West Africa, Senegal, and Nigeria, we want to be the leader in the promotion of civil society organization, to be credible partners in the promotion of peace, of democracy, of inclusive security, and rule of law in West Africa. And our activity is to promote dialogue, transparency, good governance, and participation of women and youth in French-speaking country for Partners West Africa, Senegal, and English-speaking country for Partners West Africa, Nigeria. And sometimes we work together. If, for example, we have a project that interests Nigeria, Niger, and French-speaking country and English-speaking country, and our network, because it's why our network is important, because with my bad English, Kemi can help me if I have some question, and if the question is from English-speaking English, I can ask, and we work together for that. And because we start with the NID in Guinea, with a French-speaking country, and we promote dialogue between civil society and the government and the military, and it's worked well. And now the security sector reform in Guinea is the best in all West Africa French-speaking countries, and it's why this model. We take this model and we copy this model and pass it in Mali, because there is mass problem in Mali, and I think the NID know that we done a good job, good work in Guinea, and we try to do the same in Mali. And perhaps because in Guinea now, the civil society organizations are now, they are strong. Because with our NID project, they have now the skills that they need to work now with the government and the military. And now they work and they write the national, the national strategic priorities action, because now they have the skill. And in Mali, we will do the same. And Mali, the context is different because at the first step of the project that the NID funded us, we identified that women wanted to talk, but the culture of Mali don't give them the opportunity to talk where men were. And in the recommendation we have, you have to train women without the men, and you could have good and more information. And we start this project this year, and we have many information, and they don't know many things. For example, in Mali, they have a green number to share information with the military. And the women don't use it because they don't know why they can use this green number. And they don't know the number. And with our project, we inform them the first step of this project is to sensitize them. And now they know what is the grand number, what they can use the grand number, and the grand number is just to inform. It's not a denunciation. That is different because they hate the denunciation in their culture. And now they can work, they can collaborate with the government and the military for the prevention of extreme violence. It's the same in Senegal with our project with the USIP, because we work with the local organization and the policy, and they say, and we work with the civil society organization, Young and Moon, and they work together by a dialogue process, and they identify the solution for the prevention of extremism in this area in Guédiawaye, because it's just a pilot project. And I think that is good. Thank you.
Thank you. Yemi, there's a couple of questions that, particularly on women as violent actors and the recruitment of women, communications, connections among the various groups.
First, I'll take recruitment and radicalization of women. We have a project that we're starting, like I said, a couple of weeks. It's called, the title of the project is Promoting Informed Dialogue and Engagement in Security Sector. One of the components of that project is amplifying the voices of women. And what we are seeking to do is that we would be bringing together women that work within security sector agencies, women that work within the public ministries. Ministry of Women Affairs is critical to this engagement. And then women that are working within the communities or lead civil society organizations within the community. The project is part of an initiative that is looking at, we're using the Northeast as another entry space in looking and reviewing our security sector architecture and trying to get different actors that have different issues, have a unified conversation, multi-sectorial, unisectorial, and then bringing them together. Priorities are going to be identified. Solutions are going to be identified in the silos before they are brought together. and then the solutions and recommendations are put on the table of the federal government. Also being mainstreamed into activities of development partners, because a lot of programs are being developed. Like I said, Northeast has become a critical entry point, and this project is going to be supported by the UK government. And for those of us that know Nigeria, we know that the UK government is a big player in the field of security sector reform. It would also feed into the security justice reform program that is being designed, that is going to take over from the Justice for All program in the next couple of months. So it's initiating, for the first time, I think, we're going to be doing that in country, of having activities from bottom, influencing policies, influencing design of interventions, and we're hoping that a couple of years down the line, 2 years down the line, because it's supposed to be a 2-year program, by the time we're assessing and we're reviewing, we should see something different from what we have seen in time past. Women Affairs, I said, is critical to this engagement. For those of us that know our Ministry of Women Affairs, they seem to think they are an appendage of the Office of the First Lady. However, the Ministry of Women Affairs, activities within the Ministry of Women Affairs has to change, because Women Affairs, for us within Partners, is supposed to be a cross-cutting ministry. So you're not just there and looking at women issues in silos. You're supposed to be looking at women issues across, just as youth issues has become a cross-cutting issue. That's the same way women issues should become a cross-cutting issue, not just for gender-based violence. I mean, we're looking at it from different levels, and we're hoping that we would be able to re-engineer the Ministry of Women Affairs and make it more effective. Communication. For communication within civil society groups, I can speak for my organization, I can speak from the organization I used to head, which is Claim Foundation, is the fact that we have a communication plan. We have a strategic plan, and our communication plan feeds into our strategic plan and looks at our audience. We have a collaborative relationship with state government agencies at different levels. However, we do not vet them, neither do we rubber stamp everything that they do. So the engagement is such that it's a symbiotic relationship. We tell you where you're going wrong. When we need to provide technical assistance for you to be able to address certain issues, we provide technical assistance for you to respond to these issues. When we need to provide information, when other civil society groups that don't have access come to us, and we need to assist them with access to these government agencies, we do. If they need information, we provide them with the information. That's why I mentioned that for us we're looking at this accountability framework that would help the agencies that we're looking at communicate better with the populace. And we do receive complaints, right? We do receive complaints, we do receive information from civil society groups that we also pass to this government agency. So it's a relationship that has been built on trust over time. And we continue to build on that trust so as to strengthen the institutions beyond individuals, because you would agree that we struggle with that because a lot of the institutions carry the personality of whoever it is that is heading it. And then we gather data. The data we gather, we share with them, and we share with the public, and we make it accessible. So you can want to write a policy document. We make the data available to you. Interlocutors, the project I mentioned that Stanley asked a question about, the project, we particularly looked at border communities. And we looked at border communities, communities that share border, international borders, and communities that share border within the country. We know that border communities are particularly vulnerable. We know that the borders are international borders, and some of our intra-borders are artificial borders. So they're same people living across. If you look at the response of state response to violence extremism, particularly the militarized response, there is this concept of hot pursuit, and I stand corrected by the military people that are in the room, that when they want to move into the territory of the other state, they can't, they have to stop. But the people are moving freely every day, back and forth, trading. And for us, that is a strength. For some people, they've said it means the border is porous. I beg to disagree, because these are the same people, it's the artificiality of the borders and the nation state not taking into cognizance the artificiality of these borders, because same people, same family, living across, but in different territories. So how do you take that as an advantage of the healing process, of the process of building? That's one of the things we're trying to do together with the proposal we submitted. Interlocutors for us are people from the community, not CSOs from Abuja or from Dakar that would go there, but identify the influencers that stay within that community, train them, empower them, and allow them to mentor them to take ownership of the process and build the process. We support them. And most of the times you find that this kind of projects are not attractive to donors, number one. So we're still seeking for funds for it. Number two, it's sustainable because you're building on already existing framework. Number three, it's not attractive because it doesn't fit into the narratives that we want to hear at conferences like this. But it speaks to their reality on the ground. Finally, collaborative approach, Stanley, that's what brings us together. That's the connecting dots for us. And impact is one of the things we've been talking about this afternoon, is that we need to start measuring our impact, the impact we're having on ground, and be able to start to tell the stories and put it into the public space for people to be able to appreciate. That's one of the discussions we're going to have in the next couple of days when we get into our retreat. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We are at time, so I'm very sorry, and I hope you can chat here. I mean, a couple of things. The border issue is so important because it's an economic lifeline for a lot of communities. That's the market. But unless you have regional coordination and communication among security forces, it is also a liability. What's interesting here, too, is that religion was not really brought up. And I think a lot of discussions are about kind of changing the religious narrative. And there is a place for that. But I still think that some of these issues are at the center and the core of addressing violent extremism. Two things that I'll be watching out for. One is this reintegration challenge. And how do you define culpability for somebody who has been coerced into Boko Haram and committed, or someone who volunteered, or someone who saw his family killed and then was forced to join, or someone who was forced to join underage. So all those issues are so important, and how the communities will receive them, and that whole process is hugely important, because you have to ultimately, these people have to go somewhere. Densely packed prisons is not the best place to counter violent extremism, but there also has to be some accountability for the many victims of extremism. And then second, and again, it's something that Yemi brought up, is I'll be watching for the vigilante bill and kind of the implications of that. And CJTF, the Civilian Joint Task Force in Borno State, so many people pointed to it as the turning point in the conflict, because it was the first time that there was a link between communities and security forces. Not that they were a great fighting force, but that they were willing to inform and then pass intelligence onto the security forces that civilians were not able to do or were too afraid to do. But now, and even the leaders of the CJTF will admit, they can, are we the next Boko Haram? They are young, empowered men who have carried a gun, been able to shake people down at will, and they're not going to go back to whatever they were doing before. And so how do we engage that group in a very positive way? And I think that will be a big challenge to watch, too. So thank you all very much for joining. I found this fascinating. You guys are doing great work. And please join me in thanking them.